And we're live. Hey, this is MC and MADD, Talk the War Between the States, Episode 4, the 1850s, Part 2. Hopefully we'll get through it this time around. How are you doing tonight, MC?
All right. I'm a little irritated about H.A. Goodman's comment on the Gulf of Tonkin, but that's a separate issue. That's not part of germane to this discussion at all.
I thought you would be a little bit more upset with the Putin meeting, actually, but we could talk about that on the Red Eye tomorrow night.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Yeah, but okay, so I'm not sure if we exactly left off here, but November 4th, 1856.
Go ahead and share your screen.
Oh, yeah, I'll go back to doing that. I forgot. We were doing that with this series, weren't we?
Yes. All right. Well, I think it's going to be important going forward because getting people to see what you're seeing on the screen so you understand what you're looking at, especially when you start getting into the battles. So they start to understand where some of this stuff is coming. It's going to be very important, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I made sure I don't have my grades for class up anymore. Last time we did this series, my real name was up. Well, my first name was up there. So I made sure I got rid of that this time. All right, but yeah, so November 4th, 1856, the election of Democrat James Buchanan over Republican John C. Fremont and the know-nothing American candidate Millard Fillmore. The election difference is 174 to 114 to 8 respectively, with 149 out of the 296 necessary for a majority. The popular vote was 1,836,072 for Buchanan, and it goes on down from Fremont to Fillmore. Do you think this election and the fact that James Buchanan was president really helped move the country more towards war?
It's not a matter of whether or not that it's moving the country towards war per se. All right, I think it's showing that the. All right. First of all, what do you see with this candidacy? All right, you see a fracturing of one of the major parties.
All right, yeah, absolutely. That's the main thing I see is the Republican Party finally became a party, and this is their first election, right? And they came in second. I mean, that's pretty impressive for a brand new party, right?
Well, yes. All right. So you're seeing the fracturing of a party, right? The Whigs are basically being disintegrated again right, at this point in time, and so from that standpoint, you're seeing a lot of unrest. I mean, take a look at the votes here. Unlike the recent elections, all right, what you're seeing, very specifically, you want to pop out the chat, I think. What you're seeing is the electorate, all right, meaning the populace as a whole, right, is very divided along multiple different lines. Okay, now Buchanan, of course, from the Electoral College perspective, he wins outright. I mean, this is a decent win, all right. He only needed 149 electoral votes. He gets 174. But from a popular vote, you see that it's very close in several areas, and you can see where Fillmore may have thrown electoral votes either to Buchanan or to Fremont. All right, because it is whoever wins the state. All right, wins these electoral votes to an extent. All right, I mean there are nuances, obviously, when you start talking about the Electoral College and who gets selected from each state.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I don't know if you saw it in the side chat what I just typed you, but I'll go ahead and say it out loud. Can you pull up the wording for the Dred Scott case, which we're going to go into here in a few minutes? That way we can read through it. I think that's really important.
Yeah, give me a second here. I can do that. That's not a problem.
All right, cool. But no, I really think that the Buchanan administration itself did more to hurt the country than help it. It definitely didn't help quell the separation that was really becoming culturally, where they no longer even associated with each other for the most part. Even business partnerships between Northerners and Southerners started to fall apart. I mean, and I don't see the presidency ever. He never really, tried to mend any of those differences at the time.
Well, I mean, when you say mend, what are you talking about? I mean,
I don't know, an olive branch or something, calm stuff down a little bit. I mean, I don't know. There could have been.
Well, I mean, what are you going to do to calm the situation down?
If the situation is strictly about slavery, then I don't know if there's much the Buchanan administration could have done. But my contention is it's not only about slavery. There was other issues, and those other issues could have been addressed, could they not?
What other issue is causing a fracturing in the electorate? You have people fighting in Kansas. What are they fighting over? They weren't fighting over taxes.
They were fighting over whether that would be a free or a slave state. And that's
okay, so really they're fighting over slavery. They're fighting
over the admission of a state into the country and which way it's going to go and the balance of the political system.
They're willing to battle. They're willing to go to battle. Both sides are willing to go to battle over slavery.
Yeah, but this was a minority within the whole populace of both segments of the country. You can't tell me that Kansas
happening. A minority, a different minority, or another minority fighting over a different issue.
I do believe that there was other issues, and we're going to get into those.
Were they fighting over were they willing to go to battle over those other issues? Show me where they're battling on these other issues, and maybe you'll have a point.
During the Terrace of Abomination, South Carolina threatened secession.
Do you see them going to battle over it? Do you see them at this point in time fighting, all right, physically fighting, physically engaging in battles, all right, over that issue? Charles Sumner didn't get beaten with a cane on the floor of the Senate over the issue of a tariff.
Hit him again. I'm sorry, I had to say that at least once in part 2. I enjoyed it way too much in part 1. But no, I see your point, and I'm not saying that slavery wasn't an issue. I'm saying there's many different areas that tensions could have been eased a little bit, and it might not have blown up the way it did.
How can you say that? That's ridiculous, Mad Dodge. And here's why.
Which government are
Mad
you
Dodge,
going
let me
to back
explain to you. Let me go back to the same situation. You're saying that these issues could have been inflamed. Do you think anything would have deflamed Kansas aside from that issue?
I believe if the United States government would have entered Kansas in as a slave state and then entered in the Oregon territory
in other words, if you gave up, we're not talking. You can't.
No, you don't give up anything. You're keeping.
So what's the issue you're fighting over?
You're fighting over the political balance in the country, not necessarily.
You're fighting over the political balance of slavery in the country.
No, there was an economic difference between the two segments of society.
There was an economic. Okay. There was an economic
institution. Sir.
I'm sorry, but the economic difference existed as a direct result of that quote unquote peculiar
bullshit.
Institution.
How about you look at New York and the slums that the Irish lived in? Don't give me that high and mighty moralist fucking grandstanding.
It doesn't matter. Okay, let's say that you don't have economic differences in the North and the South. Okay, that wasn't what was being fought over there. It's not saying that. No, are you trying to sit there and equate that the slaves in that slavery was the same as the poor people in New York? You're out of your freaking mind.
Why the hell was a freed black man not allowed to reside in the state of Illinois? Why? It was economic reasons, because it would take the white person's jobs, as they saw it. It's the same issue going on with immigration today.
No, so it's not the same. It's not the same. It's not even close to the same issue with immigration today.
It is about my jobs. They're stealing my jobs.
That's not what you were fighting for. You were that fight was not taking place. Was not a job. It was not an issue. My family's not from
Kansas. I didn't have a dog in that race.
All right, it was not a freaking fight in Kansas over my jobs. Okay, period. It was a fight
but this is
land, and it was a fight over slavery, and that's what it was.
This is what gets me with the whole argument. You want to just nail it down upon the economic system.
No, I
want
to nail it down to what they were fighting for, or what they were fighting over, and what they had already been established to fight over. If you sit there and take away,
if the slaves
okay, let me put it to you a different way.
We paid them a penny a week.
Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it a different way. Let's talk about it a different way. Do you have the Civil War? If the South no. Stop right there. You're the one who keeps going, well, if they would have made it easier in this way and made it easier in that way, these things would have eased tensions. Really? You know what would have eased tensions more than anything? Ending slavery. And
you could have did that without killing 600,000 Americans.
You would not.
Could have did it.
Well, then why didn't the South did it? Why didn't the South do it?
Why didn't the Buchanan administration do it?
The North did
do it the same way.
They were stopping. Their concept was to stop slavery. Their concept was to stop slavery.
You want to stop slavery, you buy the slaves and you free them yourself, just like the British did, just like it happened.
Sorry, but how are you going to get that through Congress? What was going to allow that to go through Congress?
I don't know. You argue.
How are you going to argue that in Congress? The whole fight in Congress was about slavery. And you
would have had Robert E. Lee standing up and defending your position. You would have had Jefferson Davis agreeing with your position at that point.
No, you wouldn't. Don't even
freed the slaves at the end of the war.
The reality was you would not. If slavery wasn't so important, why was it re-enshrined in the Southern Constitution?
It was enshrined the same way it was enshrined within the American Constitution.
Oh, no, it was not enshrined the same way. It wasn't that. In fact, it was put in there. It was put inside of there. And so what you would have ended up with, if that was the case, if that was your situation, if slavery wasn't the issue, why was it only slave states joined the South?
Because it was an economic. Oh my God! I'm telling you,
because it was a part of the culture of the South, and it relied upon slavery. Everything pivoted around that. Their economic system pivoted around slavery, and you can't get away from that.
Oh, I'm going through the Confederate Constitution right now. Just a minute. But no, actually, no, we're jumping ahead. We're going to have these arguments later. Yeah, wait a minute. I better stop myself here.
You're the one who brought this up and pushed it to this extent.
Well, no, because it's ridiculous, because there's the moral grandstanding from all the modern historians that tell you that the North did nothing wrong, but they wouldn't allow a freed black to live there. If they stayed in their state for more than a week, they were flogged.
You're conflating separate issues about what's going on today in Northern and how certain people that you don't like write about the history. Okay, that's not the issues that we're talking about right now. We're talking about how how this all came about from the perspective of the 1850s and what we're going with now. If you want to stick on that, and we want to stick on that, then we'll stick on that.
Fair enough. Let's move on to the worst Supreme Court decision ever, in not just my opinion, but Judge Andrew Napolitano's opinion as well. The Dred Scott decision. You want to tell the people about this? And I agree, it's the worst decision ever.
Okay, here let's give some background to this. Okay, in what you have is Dred Scott goes across the border. I believe he went from Kentucky into Ohio, if I'm not mistaken. It was either Ohio or Illinois. And once he went into there, the Dred Scott said, well, I'm a free man. I no longer have to listen to you. I'm no longer your slave. Okay. Now, this argument about whether or not Dred Scott is a slave once he goes across the border from Kentucky into Ohio, I believe. Let me see if that was Ohio or not. Well, it doesn't really matter.
And he was a
slave,
or was he a slave that escaped? I missed that.
No, he was not. He was not a slave that was escaped at all. In fact, he went over the border with his master. Okay.
Oh, okay.
And he then said, "Okay, I'm free. I'm not going back." Okay.
Hey, I call fair. I say that's fair. I mean, good for him. Fucking hell.
Okay, so
You know, I don't see, you know, this is a little digression, but I don't see how Thomas Jefferson was able to take his slaves to France with him, and he did. He would rotate them in and out of the country, and for some reason, the French allowed him to keep his slaves when they had outlawed slavery. It was really bizarre. Anyway, you can continue. I just wanted the little historical fact there that not very many people know about.
when he did that, he was acting as what?
United States ambassador, but we weren't a country yet.
But I don't believe. Yeah, but I don't believe. Yeah, that was before I think they freed slaves. They still had Haiti and everything, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, yeah, no, you're right, because the Haiti thing was much later. That was what?
Yeah. I don't think. Yeah, I don't think you have you don't have France freeing slaves at this point yet. So that's a bit of a misnomer.
Okay, fair enough. All right, go ahead and continue with Dred
Scott. So anyway, this goes to the Supreme Court in what I believe was a 7-2 ruling. All right, with Chief Justice Tawney writing the overall opinion, the majority's opinion. He said that in this decision that it's up to the United States Congress to determine the status of a slave or not a slave. In other words, what he was saying is that the state of Ohio couldn't determine the status of a slave in the state of Kentucky or in the state of Missouri. Okay, I could be wrong about that. I think it was actually Missouri where he came from, right? And so therefore, since they can't determine the status, since one state can't determine the status of a person or a citizen status, the citizenship status of a person in another state, therefore they couldn't then determine that he was no longer a slave. So essentially, what this decision basically said is there's no such thing as a free state or a slave state. If you entered the state of Ohio as a slave, you are still a slave.
Yeah, so essentially what they were saying, the way they backed up this case, if I'm remembering correctly, is under property rights, right? So if you own a car in Oregon and you drive your car into California and you don't break the law or anything, they can't just take your car because the emissions are too high or something. And yes, I know, horrible fucking comparison, but guess what? That was the way they looked at it. I'm sorry, I have to break it down.
That was the way they were looking at it. But basically, what this ruling did is it not only screwed up the Missouri Compromise and what was going on in Kansas, it actually went further in that it said, because Tawney continued to write further, right? Basically said that any person, all right, who had gone to the north, since there weren't a lot of black people that weren't slaves to begin with, that all of them were slaves anyway. So basically, he said that. He created an open season on any black person in the United States as being able to be captured by other people and from the these slave impressment gangs, right?
Yeah,
coming from the South.
I think you're putting it too nicely when you say captured. I call it kidnapping, especially in my home state of Louisiana. No, in my home state of Louisiana, there was more freed blacks who owned slaves than whites by Kappa, really, because they were freed in a will and then they inherited the property and then they owned slaves themselves and they never freed them, which was quite odd. But that's saying, if they travel to New York, they could be captured and sold back into slavery, even though they are freed. They are legally free and they own slaves themselves.
Yeah, it was an absolutely ridiculous ruling when you start applying it the way they applied it. I mean, it's one thing to say, okay, the United States Congress has to sit up there and determine the citizenship of who's a citizen of the United States. That's all well and good. All right. But for them to sit up there and say, well, who's going to be a citizen of the state of Ohio? Who's going to be the citizen of the state of Missouri, et cetera? That is just absolutely ridiculous. All right. And then to go further and basically say, and if a black person is basically captured in the state of Ohio and then dragged down into Missouri, he is now a slave, that this is perfectly acceptable. This is insane. All right. This was an absolutely atrocious a horrifying ruling to make this kind of a comment. Now, you can come back and say,
real quick, MC, real quick. Absolutely. I just want to the chat here. Irate Prostate asks, states' rights were trumped by federal law. And question mark. I would put it that way. Yes. Would you, MC?
In this situation, you had a bifurcation of what was more important in the state laws or the federal law. And when they looked at it and said that a slave is not a human being but a piece of property, then yes, the states had the authority to determine property. All right, because Congress hadn't determined the state of citizenship. That's what essentially it's coming down to.
Yeah, exactly. And no, the whole basis of humans being property is insane to me. I can't wrap my mind around it. But then again, I was born in 1984. Why would I be able to wrap my mind around it? I don't live in Libya. I don't live where there's open slave markets. You know what I mean?
It's not it's not just that. It's a different time frame. You got to remember when slavery. There was a time frame when slavery was ubiquitous around the world. All right, to have slaves wasn't to have slavery exist. All right, wasn't unusual. Now it was always unusual to have slaves because only the rich could afford slaves, for all intents and purposes.
Well, no, and and let's look at it this way: if everybody was able to afford them and have them, how outnumbered would you be as a slaveholding population? I mean, that's just asking for a Haitian-style uprising, is it not?
Well, I mean, in history, you've had a number of different areas and a number of different nations that the slaves outnumbered the overall populace, right? If you want to look at it from a very strict point of view. For example, in Sparta, they declared that the Helots were basically their slaves, and from a citizenship population, meaning the citizens of Sparta versus the Helots, they were well outnumbered. Okay, the Helots outnumbered them quite a bit, quite readily. All right, but they would declare ritual war every year on the Helots so that they could kill them and make sure that the population was terrorized and wouldn't revolt. Okay, that's how they handled that back in the ancient time frames. All right, but yes, when slaves outnumber the populace, there is always the opportunity, all right, for a massive slave uprising to take place, and then put the sword to the people. This was what almost happened, all right, during the uprising of Spartacus.
I was gonna say, if you're gonna say John Brown, he didn't even get close, my friend. Matter of fact,
no. The Bacon Rebellion in the late 1700s was closer to a true slave rebellion. It was late 1700s or early 1600s, or I mean early 1700s. Anyway, Nate.
Yeah, Irate Prostate says something else that's really interesting, and I want your take on it. This decision caused a civil war, he says, and here's my take real quick. I tend to agree with you, Irate Prostate. And the reason I agree is because this decision made even freed blacks fear for their safety traveling in a northern territory or state. And the fact that you could be, literally kidnapped and sold back into slavery must have been, well, enough to make you move to Canada. That being said, it also enraged the small abolition movement that was around at the time. And when I say small, I mean small. It wasn't gigantic, okay? The history books want to act like half of the people in the country believed in abolition. That's not true. It was lucky to be 5%. But
no, I think you're just, if you just take a look at the election that you're talking about, it was bigger than 5%. You have to recognize that.
All right, what percentage would you put it? Because I know it sure as hell wasn't 50.
No, you're looking about. You're looking about.
Look at the race riots in New York. New Yorkers definitely didn't fucking care.
Well, there's a difference between just because. Okay, that doesn't mean. Just because you wanted to free the slaves didn't mean that you thought that black people were. You didn't mean that you weren't a racist, right? And by the way, it was 1676, the Bacon Rebellion. So I apologize for that. but what you're looking at is probably about 30% of the populace. A good 35% of the populace. We're hardcore. We're abolitionists. All right.
How many of that group would have been Southerners? I would say not very many, and if they were the poor Southerners.
It's hard to know. All right. Just how overall that was. There weren't very many abolitionist papers in the South, and of course, one of the reasons is if you tried to start one, you would get run out of town on a rail. You would have your place burned to the ground. You would be tarred and feathered and basically chased out of the community.
Yeah, no, and I'm not saying that the South did nothing wrong. All right, I'm just saying there was a lot of different things that came into the start of this war, and that's why we're going through it decade by decade. You know, well, I'm really enjoying doing this.
And talking about the Dred Scott decision and just how heinous it was, people have to understand part of the ruling actually makes sense. The fact that the state of Missouri can't tell the state of Ohio, or the state of Ohio to tell the state of Missouri who is and isn't a citizen of the United States, that is actually not inconsequential, right? It's an understandable standpoint. But when you go back further and you say, okay, but anybody that's black, when you continue on with it, and you basically say that anybody that's black, all right, was probably a slave, and therefore, since you can't tell whether or not somebody freed themselves or whether or not they escaped slavery, so therefore it's basically open season on any black person in the entire United States. All right, this is absolute nonsense. All right, to even make that kind of claim. Now, these are people that were born, you know, in these states. These are people that were citizens of these states and had been citizens of these states in their entire lives, like in what was happening in Massachusetts. Not every black person in Massachusetts was an escaped slave. And to come back and say, well, they then are subject to being captured and sent back to the South, all right, under the Fugitive Slave Act.
Yeah, no, and this is a states' rights issue. This is where I believe Massachusetts got up in arms itself, and I don't believe this is when they threatened secession. I think that was about that was with the compromise of God damn it, I'm drawing a blank. You know what I'm talking about, the Missouri Compromise.
Well, but threatening secession, all right, is saying that you're going to try
threatening secession. Threatening secession is legitimizing it and accepting that it exists.
No, well, you can say that they threatened it. Doesn't mean anything. Did they carry through with it? No.
That means they accept the fact that it exists. Sir.
No, it means that they sit up there and back down their rhetoric. That doesn't mean that they accepted anything.
Hey, just because the Yankees don't have the balls to do it, it ain't my problem. All right. The problem is
just because the South lost in their little temper tantrum and had a temper tantrum over slavery doesn't make it right either.
That was one hell of a temper tantrum.
Yeah, it was. It was a recognition of what you're saying. Most wars that when you're dealing with this kind of a civil war, and we're getting ahead of ourselves, and I understand that. But one of the things that people have got to understand about the Civil War, right, is you weren't dealing with the situation as it exists today. You were dealing with different cultural entities that existed back in that time frame, and we don't recognize them today because they don't exist today. All right.
Well, see, the thing is, though, also, when I'm saying that there is two different societies, that's because there was. And these two societies have been clashing since the formation, and it came to a boiling point. They have been clashing since Thomas Jefferson told Hamilton to fucking suck him off. Fuck off with your fucking bank. They've been clashing since Andrew Jackson killed the bank. They've been clashing over states' rights from the beginning. If you read the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist papers, you can see the argument in plain view. I mean, just because one side won doesn't mean the other side is illegitimate.
Just because one side got their ass kicked doesn't mean that they are great, grand, and glorious, and they were doing either.
The South was kicking y'all's ass in the argument of ideals.
No, they weren't. And that's why they
Grant or Lincoln?
And what's more is if their ideas were so great, then they wouldn't have needed to sit up there and take up arms and do it illegally. They could have just as easily done it through the Constitution.
We will get to
a number of remedies.
There
are a number of remedies short of that they had agreed to when they agreed to the Constitution.
Here's the thing, though.
No. Don't give me
which president was it that said the South uses the Constitution like a shield?
It doesn't matter.
No, it does matter, because when you don't win the war of ideas and then you pick up arms and force a shot in a war,
I'm sorry, but they didn't.
Get to you.
When they were talking about using it as a shield, and that kind of stuff, all right, they still didn't sit up there and follow the Constitution. There is a method in the Constitution for a state to no longer be part of the United States.
Why didn't they put Jefferson Davis on trial then and prove the illegality of secession? Instead, they said, we won the war. We get to say you can't do it. Why didn't they put him on trial?
Why is that always necessary?
Why is that always necessary? He is the head rebel.
All right.
You're supposed to hang him.
I hate you, and believe me, I was not one of the ones that was opposed to doing it.
Okay, I know this one's true. You know, the Pope actually sent.
I don't care about the Pope. What does the Pope have to do with the United States?
Little fact. This is a great little fact. So Jefferson Davis is locked up in a Yankee prison, and he gets a package from the Pope. And you know what it was? A handmade crown of thorns made by the Pope. That's pretty sweet. You got to be a pretty cool dude to get a gift like that from the Pope. Just saying.
And it really did a freaking wonder for how it was done, wasn't it? Let's have foreign leaders sit up there and interfere more with elections back in the 1800s, because that hasn't been a thing today.
Oh, is that papal collusion right there? God damn it. Okay.
Yeah. It did a lot of good when the KKK started hunting down freaking, Catholics throughout the South, burning Catholic churches and bombing them, right?
No, I love it when people are like, what are you, in the Klan? No, I'm not racist. I'm not at all. And matter of fact, I'm on the kill list. Or at least I was until I became agnostic. But I was on the kill list. I was raised Catholic. My whole family is Catholic.
Yeah.
Come on. We were hanging right next to him. Shit.
But anyway, back to this. So basically, anyway, you have an absolutely ridiculous ruling, all right. And unfortunately, if I'm not mistaken, it was a 7-2 ruling. This was not close in the Supreme Court. Okay. Now, granted, like all Supreme Court rulings, you not everyone writes an opinion, all right. They just many of the people just say, okay, this is what my ruling was, and they don't bother to write the opinion. The opinion came from Chief Justice Taney.
Okay, and you have the opinion. You're going to read a little bit of it.
Well, I've been looking for it. I got the whole thing as it put it up. It's hard to read all of this because it's so freaking long, and I don't want to bore everybody on this whole thing.
If you could skim it real quick and find a couple of highlights that really highlight the opinion of the. Is this the majority opinion or the minority opinion?
This is the opinion. This is the majority opinion. All right.
I would love to hear the minority opinion.
Okay, so he was taken into the state of Illinois. Okay. So upon the whole, therefore, it is the judgment of this court that it appears by the record for us that the plaintiff is in error, is not a citizen of Missouri in the sense that it is used in the Constitution, and that the Circuit Court of the United States, for that reason, had no justification in this case and could give no judgment in it. It is the judgment for the defendant must consequently be reversed, and a mandate issued directing that the suit be dismissed for want of jurisdiction.
Okay, so basically what he's saying there is he legally brought him across the state lines, and he's legally allowed to bring his property back. That's
right.
Basically what they're saying.
Now, Dred Scott himself, all right, his owner basically let him buy his own freedom and that of his family. All right. So, I mean, from him, this had already taken place. But what had happened is this ruling basically busts up the entire Missouri Compromise. The idea that above the Mason-Dixon line will be free and then below the Mason-Dixon line will be slave. It throws all that out. It further throws out the fact that a person, once they go into a free state, like I was saying before, once they get across that border and somehow now they've gone north and now they're free, all right, that they're not free, that they're still a slave, that the Fugitive Slave Act can go in and capture them. And as a ruling of saying, well, since we can't necessarily determine what the status is of a person being free or not, basically it's saying that anybody that's captured in the north and brought down to the south technically can be put in slavery. You got to remember, now people recognize the idea that a black person was a slave, right? But there's nothing that says that white people couldn't be slaves. There was literally nothing in the Constitution that said you had to be a Negro.
Well, no, actually, they had indentured servitude as well when they first instituted slavery amongst the colonies. Indentured servitude was the European population's form of slavery because they couldn't pay to get here. So they paid with their labor, and their labor lasted 10 or 15 years.
The reason behind that had to do more with the fact that many of the people that were coming over were technically serfs, and it was a method of serfdom that was trying to be then applied as it came into the United States. All right, now serfs had they weren't freemen, but they weren't quote unquote slaves either. They were tied to the land. But the idea is once you came over here for indentured servitude, is you served so many years and then you could go out and get your own parcel of land and you could expand, because the way the settlers were looking at it back then was that the continent, for all intents and purposes, all right, is uninhabited. All right. That the Native Americans didn't inhabit the land. There was very few of them to inhabit the land. Now,
man, were they wrong on that one?
Well, yes and no. Part of the problem, of course, is how do you define land and so forth, but also the fact that, quite frankly, since the white man had come over, there had been waves of smallpox, plagues that had wiped out a large portion of the native population that had existed beforehand. There were whole swaths where the Native Americans were completely wiped off the face of the earth due to smallpox prior to them ever seeing a white person.
Well, no, exactly, and not to go too far back in history here, because that's not what we're discussing, but that's how the Spanish were able to control vast swaths of territory in South America and other places without that many troops. It's because the diseases had thinned the population out so much to where they were easily quelled.
Yeah, yes and no. There are other. I mean, if you want to study the conquistadors and how they ruled and everything and how they were able to get away with what they did, there were a number of factors. Yes, disease was definitely one of them, and it was one of the most potent ones. Between the years when Cortez comes to Mexico, between the first year he goes to Mexico City to the second year to Mexico City, that Mexico City goes from a population of Aztecs of close to 1 million to under 500,000 in a single year due to plague, due to the smallpox epidemic.
Well, no, and not to mention, there's still traces of the Black Plague or whatever in your neck of the woods, in Arizona, New Mexico, areas of California, Idaho, Eastern Oregon.
We assume what we call the bubonic plague is the Black Death. To be honest, it seems like that's probably accurate, but the reality is we don't actually know what the Black Death actually was. I just want people to understand that. Yes, there are still times when you have bubonic plague show up in a few cases here in Arizona and New Mexico and in the Mexican border towns. That still does happen from time to time. It is rare. It does exist. Obviously, we have better methods of medicine to keep people alive. All right, so it's not nearly as virulent as it was.
It's not even as nasty as it was if you catch it soon enough. And I saw the thing on it. You can get it from cats and from rodents, obviously, but What are they? Those little fucking ground fucking things in the desert. I don't know what they.
Well, they got mice and rats.
Not
and
mice.
Fleas.
No, there's something bigger. There's something bigger that carries it in the desert. I can't remember what it is right now. Not a coyote, but something smaller than that. I don't know. I digress.
I mean, the only thing I can think of that's around that time, around like that, is a quadamundi. But
yeah, but I digress. That's not what we're talking about.
no, let's get back to the Civil War in the 1850s.
Do you think the Dred Scott decision really propelled the country towards the only way that you can settle this issue is through a war? I disagree with that still, but I'm seeing the slippery slope turn into a goddamn cliff. And that's looking back, hindsight's 2020. But we can almost see it after the Dred Scott decision. Shit hits the fan, man.
Well, yeah, but shit hits the fan because now it's a free for all. Okay, the thing is that now the virulent slavers versus the virulent anti-slavers, all right, come directly into conflict. All right. It has basically taken any chance at moderation, all right, to where we can come back with a compromise, all right, and has thrown it into the ground, all right, because the problem has been that the Senate had been split 50-50. Now, okay, what would have happened, all right, if, for example, the state of Virginia had said, okay, we're going to declare ourselves free, we're now a free state. Everything's out of balance. They'd always been balancing things with free states and slave states. When one state said they were free, another state said they were slave, right?
That's why I think they messed up.
All right,
they messed up when they allowed the states to self-determine. They should have said, okay, Kansas, you're a slave state. Oregon, you're admitted as a free state.
Right, but the Dred Scott decision threw that away. There was no way that you could do that anymore because the Dred Scott decision basically said that you're not free or you're not slave anyway. Even if you declare yourself a free state, okay, they can still bring in slaves in your state. That's essentially what they said.
But what happens when you become a resident of said state though? They didn't declare on that.
They still, yes, they did. They said a man doesn't become a non-slave, all right, just because he moves across the border.
Moves across. I thought this was a temporary where they went across, and he was like, "No, I ain't going back, boss."
This was a temporary thing, but now how do you tell somebody who brings his slaves over and says, "I'm going to farm this land," that they're not slaves anymore? You got to remember, they basically said you cannot determine that state could not determine what the status of that individual is. They said that that's property, and the states don't have the authority to change that from property to a human being or a citizen.
Yeah. Is there any way you can find the minority opinion on that?
I can look for it.
I'm really interested in the minority opinion. If you can't, I could try and load up my school's library. I bet it's in there, but that might take a lot of CPU. I don't know. I'm getting that new computer soon, so I'll be able to do shit like that. But right now, it's still touch and go.
Let me see if I can get the dissenting opinion.
No, and is Candid active in Discord? I don't see her. Darn, she's the one that's going to be a lawyer. I'd love to hear her opinion on the Dred Scott decision. While you're looking for that, I want to bring up, once again, Judge Andrew Napolitano. I was watching a speech by him. Not the ones I watched last night, but this was probably a year or two ago, actually, now. But he brings up the Dred Scott decision, and he also brings up that afterwards, the slave catchers would be paid $50 for every slave they caught. But if they caught somebody and proved that they were free, they were still paid $25. Interesting how that, you put it that way, no wonder they were kidnapping people left and right. I mean, still slavery is horrible. Once again, I hate having to have that disclaimer. Everybody should fucking know that. But the fact is, though, returning a slave got you $50. Freeing a free man, and letting him go only got you $25. why the hell aren't you going to take him to Nolans? You know what I mean?
Well, why wouldn't you just grab anybody? Because you're going to get paid either way. Just start grabbing people and bringing them across, and you're going to get paid. All right. I mean,
yeah.
All right.
Yeah, these are almost like privateers. It was almost like a pirate thing going on.
Yeah, you basically, for all intents and purposes, what they called Negroes back in those days were basically we can grab you at any point in time and bring you across, and then we don't have to worry about it. It basically legalized and encouraged kidnapping coming across the border.
Yeah, no, and it's a travesty of justice. Okay, so the speech I was watching by Napolitano last night was one where he talks about the natural law. When you read the Declaration of Independence and when you read the Constitution, it doesn't say the government grants you the freedom of speech. It says it shall apply no law to abridge said freedom of speech. That means inherently, as human beings, whether you believe in God and your creator, as he put it, as he's Roman Catholic. So he said, as I am created in my creator's image and he is perfectly free, then I am perfectly free.
Here's one of the dissents. I mean, one mode of approach in this question is to inquire who were citizens of the United States at the time of the adoption of the Constitution. At the time of the ratification of the Articles of Confederation, all free-born, native-born inhabitants of the states of New Hampshire, Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, and North Carolina, though they descended from African slaves, were not only citizens of the states, but such of them as had the other necessary qualifications, possess the enfranchise of electors, the right to vote, on equal terms with other citizens. I dissent, therefore, from that part of the opinion of the majority in which it is held that a person of African descent cannot be a citizen of the United States. I regret I must go further and dissent both from what I deem their assumption of authority to examine the constitutionality of the act of Congress, commonly called the Missouri Compromise, and on grounds and conclusions announced their opinions. That's an excerpt from his dissent.
Wow. Wow. And he even brings up the Missouri Compromise, just like you were saying, and you had just found that, right?
Yeah, that was the dissent by Justice Benjamin Curtis on the Dred Scott decision, 1857.
I agree with him wholeheartedly. I really believe the Dred Scott decision was the worst decision until Roe v. Wade.
It's a horrifying decision. There's no doubt about it, and it did further inflame the issues and basically pushed people that were on both sides of the issues. It hardened their stances, all right, which were already inflamed to the point where people were fighting over it. And this is something that people have to understand. People were already willing to commit violence, both for and against, all right, to get their way on this very specific issue. And if you want to continue now to where we will, because the next big thing that happens for all intents and purposes in that timeline is, of course, the beginnings of John Brown.
Yeah, well, I'm pulling up the timeline. Here we go. All right, so Edward, stop it. Sorry. Yeah. Oops. Anyway, March 19th to March 20th, 1857, Massachusetts Senator Charles Sumner gives his crime against Kansas speech. What's the crime against Kansas, sir?
But basically what they're referring to, do you want to pull up his speech?
Yeah, actually, if you can, I'll stop screen sharing and you can share it. That'd be great.
Give me a second here.
Yeah, sorry, man. We'll prep a little bit more this weekend when we do the next episode, so we have everything pulled up. My bad. We messed up, you guys. We were supposed to do this last weekend, but my internet was down. It was down all over my area for like 50 square miles, so there was nothing I could do about it. So that's why we're making it up today. I'm going to check the chat. How are you guys doing? Let's see.
Here we go.
All right. So Memes is yelling at Sherardi. No, I'm kidding. No.
Don't
Memes
take any
yell at
freaking
anybody.
shit from memes. Freaking little commie bastard. Just joking, memes. Just joking.
Well, you know about the bastard part. We don't know his family lineage.
Okay, here's the full text of this. Right, I don't know if you guys can see this or not, but this is the text. Mr. President, you are now called to redress a great transgression. Seldom in the history of nations has such a question been presented. Tariffs, army bills, navy bills, land bills are important and justly occupy your care, but these all belong to the course of ordinary legislation. As means and instruments only, they are necessarily subordinate to the conservation of the government itself. Grant them or deny them in greater or lesser degree, and you will inflict no shock. The machinery of government will continue to move. The state will not cease to exist. Far otherwise it is with the eminent question now before you, involving as it does liberty in the broad territory and also involving the peace of the whole country with our good name in history forevermore.
Okay,
Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, if you want, I'll read the next paragraph for you.
Sure.
Take down your map, sir. Oh, you moved it. Okay. Take down your map, sir, and you will find that the territory of Kansas, more than any other region, occupies the middle spot of North America, equally distant from the Atlantic on the east and the Pacific on the west. From the frozen waters of the Hudson Bay on the north to the tepid Gulf Stream to the south, constituting the precise territorial center of the whole vast continent. To such advantage of situation on the very highway between two oceans are added a soil of unsurpassed richness and a fascinating, unadulterated beauty of surface, with a health-given climate calculated to nature a powerful and generous people, worthy to be the central pivot of American institutions.
Okay, so stop right there because I grew up in Nebraska, which is just right above Kansas. No, don't tell me what Kansas is like. Kansas is hot as hell in the freaking summertime, cold as freaking get out in the freaking wintertime, right? With windswept freaking plains, nary a freaking, a tree to freaking stop the freaking blowing wind in the blizzard in the wintertime. So if Charles Sumner truly believed that crap, why didn't he freaking move there? He's full of freaking crap.
Well, yeah, no, and we don't have to go through the whole entire speech. I don't know if they want to hear it all. But literally what he's saying is Kansas is the middle of the country, and how dare we allow them to be a slave state? That would shift the balance towards the South necessarily, right?
Well, you have what they call the Nebraska-Kansas Act. This is the Nebraska-Kansas territory. What they're referring to is basically the broad expanse, not just of the what we consider the state of Kansas today. But this is becoming this has now become the core issue. Okay, whereas before, above the Mason-Dixon line, they were going to let people come in free, and below the Mason-Dixon line, they were going to sit up there and allow them to come in as slave states. Now everything is thrown in turmoil.
Yeah,
let me continue on with this. In a few short months, only have passed since this spacious Mediterranean countryside, which is not a Mediterranean country, guys. I'm sorry, was open only to the savage who ran wild in its woods and prairies. Now it has already drawn to its bosom a population of freemen larger than Athens, crowded with her historic, with her sons in Midides, one for liberty and the fields of Marathon. Okay, more than Sparta contained when she ruled Greece and sent forth her devoted children, quickened by a mother's benediction, to return with their shields or on them. More than Rome. Basically, he's saying that the population of Kansas is now above all these great cities. Right.
I love all the racist remarks in there about Native Americans, but do continue.
Well, welcome to it was only one comment. They just said savage.
Yeah, running through its meadows and shit. Give me a fucking break.
Against this territory, I'm skipping ahead of here a little bit. Against this territory, thus fortunate in position of population, a crime has been committed which is without example in the records of the past, not in plundering providences, nor in the cruelties of self-governors will you find its parallel. And yet there it is an ancient instance which may show at least the path of justice. In the terrible impeachment by which the great Roman orator has blasted through all time in the name of Verus, amidst the charges of robbery, sacrilege, the enormity which almost aroused the judgment voice of his accuser, in which still stands forth with strongest distinction, arresting in sympathetic indignation of all who read this story, is that away in Sicily he has scourged the citizen of Rome, that the cry, I am a Roman citizen, had been interposed in vain against the lash of the tyrant governor. All right. Other charges were that he had carried away the production of art and thus violated the sacred shrines. I'm sorry. It was in the presence of the Roman Senate that this arraignment proceeded, in the temple of the Forum, amidst crowds such as no order has ever before drawn together, thronging the porticuses and colonnades, even clinging to the house tops and neighboring slopes, and under the anxious gaze of witnesses, the scene of the crime, but an audience far grander, with higher dignity and more various peoples of wired intoxication. Okay, I mean, we could go on. This thing's pretty long. I don't know if you really want to go through the whole thing.
Didn't he almost die? How did he have that much strength to say that whole speech?
Well, I guess you didn't kill him soon enough, then, huh?
I didn't hit him. It wasn't me that caned him.
Yeah, you were trying to sit up there and get encouraged to caning. What are you talking about? This is Charles. This is a reproach, basically, by Charles Sumner of what was going on in Kansas, and there's a reason they're calling it Bleeding Kansas. Now, what's been happening, of course, is you have raids from pro-slave and abolitionists taking place across the state of Kansas. All right. If there's an enclave such as Lawrence, Kansas, of abolitionists, it became a target by the pro-slave groups. If you had and the similar things were taking place the other way. This is where John Brown basically begins his, teething. All right, if you want to look at it in his murderous rampage, as he then takes out and begins to attack and kill pro-slavery settlers within the state of Kansas.
Yeah, no, and I'm going to start sharing my screen again. This was said by a Southerner, and it's the most arrogant thing I've ever seen. March 4th, 1858. But if there were no other reason why we should never have war, would any sane nation make war on cotton without firing a gun, without drawing a sword? Should they make war on us, we could bring the whole world to our feet. South Carolina Senator James Henry Hammond, the Mudsill speech, and he is a fucking moron.
Well,
damn it.
Yeah, but you got to remember he's looking at what he's basically trying to say. All right, is from his point of view, there won't be a civil war. That economics is too important for there to be a civil war. That the economic concerns of the North will prevent them from ever going to war. That is what he's saying.
In a book I might write, my alternate timeline has the British intervening and breaking the blockade. So I believe that could have happened, and he has a point when it comes to the sale of cotton. But the thing is,
to say that you're gonna do it without the firing a gun. Or, the South, obviously the South, obviously the North is not, or I mean, the Britain's not going to come in on the side of the South without gun, without a battle being already taking place, and the you got to remember when if Britain had attempted to do that, if you write your alternative history, you'd better take a look at what Britain was going through during that time frame and why they couldn't just intervene the way you expect them that they could. And what's more is you're also going to have to take a look at their advantages of not intervening. All right, not the least of which is the growing cotton belt that you end up with in Egypt at the time.
That's what I was going to say. He couldn't foresee that either. And that's where I'm saying that the firebranders, the fire eaters, whatever you want to call them from South Carolina, they just didn't get it. They couldn't see the whole world economy. And they just didn't get it. Yeah, you're top dog now. But guess what?
Okay, but why was the South Carolina like that? All right. I think this is one of the things that you got to recognize. All right. The South Carolinians looked at themselves, all right, as still the aristocracy. Most of these people that are in charge in South Carolina, these large plantation owners and everything, they have an aristocratic mentality that almost directly stems from.
They always did. South Carolina almost never joined the revolution. Yeah,
exactly. And this is what I'm trying to point out when I talk about the different cultures within the South. It was a different attitude. But it was also a different attitude that was based upon the slavery, especially within South Carolina. South Carolina had a very arrogant attitude, all right, toward the rest of the United States, and they always had that even prior to joining the revolution. They had a specific mindset within the leadership. Now, understand, I'm not talking about the average citizen of South Carolina, but I'm talking about the leadership that was chosen was still very much we are better than every other walking thing on the planet Earth. They believed themselves as a superior life form. They really did.
Well, yeah, and the man they sent to represent South Carolina during the Revolution was one of the youngest there, and he was full of arrogance as well, at least from the writings I've read. And also the dramatic stuff like John Adams on HBO, but that's not necessarily true. But I've also read a lot on the Revolutionary War, obviously.
South Carolinians were frickin' some of the most arrogant SOBs on the planet, and they carried that through. Now you can't argue that they weren't willing to fight. They were definitely willing to fight. All right. And during the Revolutionary War, there was a lot of fighting that took place in South Carolina, even prior to the actual British landing down there, because they were fighting amongst themselves between the quote unquote loyalists and the revolutionaries, and they were burning each other out. They were a very hot, as you called, firebrand type of people, fire eaters. that describes a good portion of the populace as a whole.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I got that terminology for them from the North and South book series, actually. That's what they called them there. And it sounded about right with their political leanings and just how arrogant they really, really were.
Well, one of your big heroes that you constantly talk about, Calhoun, was from South Carolina, and you can see in all of his writings.
I like Calhoun, though. Come on, leave him alone.
He was an arrogant ass, and he was and this was an example of it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, do you want to do the Abraham Lincoln quote from June 16th?
A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. Abraham Lincoln. And
I believe that was Stephen Douglas debates, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. This is in the Douglas debates for the Senate from Illinois. Now, the thing that people got to remember is that keep in mind just a year before, what do you have? You had the Dred Scott decision, all right, and this is causing the ramifications from this are echoing out. Okay. And what you have going on now is you end up, I think that we'll just skip the October 25th and go straight to October 16th, right, in 1859. And this basically leads to John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry. Now, John Brown.
I want to say my piece real quick about John Brown. John Brown was a terrorist piece of scum. The first person he killed in Harper's Ferry was a black man. He didn't give a shit. He was a terrorist, and that is why they hung him. Go ahead and give your synopsis on the piece of shit.
The raid, the first person killed in the raid. I don't know if it was done by John Brown or one of his other compatriots.
Fair enough. But he brought him there.
What he decided to do is he said, since we're at a point in this country, I'm going to lead a slave rebellion in the South. And the way he was going to do it was he was going to seize Harper's Ferry. Now, when he's going into Harper's Ferry, what he's looking to do is he's trying to seize the arsenal at Harper's Ferry. Harper's Ferry is a large U.S. arsenal. It has a number of muskets,
and it will be coming up. Yeah, it was an arsenal. It had a number of muskets. It had a small amount of cannons. You're correct. It also had ammunition, which is really important. And Harper's Ferry, I just want everybody. I know there's only one person watching right now, but people will watch this later as well. Harper's Ferry is going to reappear in this series numerous times. It was a very strategic location, so there was a reason he targeted this.
It's a crossroads, but the main reason he was targeting it in this case was so he could get the arsenal, because the arsenal was there, and he thought that once he grabbed the arsenal, he'd be able to go in there, get in there. Now, there's not a lot of people in Harper's Ferry. It's not a heavily populated area in comparison, but he thought he could go in there, seize the arsenal, and immediately escape, and then start his plunder down south, trying to recreate Spartacus, where slaves would join him in a rebellion, all right, where he would just go in and free slaves from plantation to plantation and swell their ranks and arm them from Harper, with the muskets and the ammunition from Harper's Ferry, and that this would turn into a slave rebellion that would sweep throughout the South. Okay, well, the first thing happens is he seizes Harper's Ferry. The populace says we're not dealing with this, and they basically trap him in his small group of militia, which was a dozen people or so. All right, in the arsenal itself.
Well, no, that's right. And what happens, though, is he stays there overnight on October 16th. I think he actually attacked that night, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so October 17th, President Buchanan immediately orders Robert Edward Lee and the United States Marines to respond to the Harper's Ferry raid. And they immediately respond. And actually, a number of very influential people were there. Jeb Stuart was there. He's the one that delivered the terms to John Brown, if I remember correctly.
Yes, he does. Now, the Marines, yes, he does order. Buchanan does order the military to move against them, and he hands the leadership of that to Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee grabs who's available, right? Which is generally, for the most part, the largest group of contingent are Marines, right? That's why he's grabbing Marines. At this point in time, Jeb Stuart is not a member of the United States Marine Corps. Okay.
Well, no, he never was. He was always a cavalry man.
Right. He was always in the Army. I just want people to understand, so people don't understand what's going on. The reason that Robert E. Lee is controlling the Marines, or that he's ordering the Marines, is that was what was available to respond. All right, that he had on hand, that had a complete unit available.
Well, no, and it's kind of interesting. They chose him. Wasn't he in the Corps of Engineers at the time, or am I wrong there?
Well, Robert E. Lee came up through the Corps of Engineers. He himself, though, he wasn't. I don't know if he was actually in that part of the Corps at the time, but he was always considered one of the primary, rising stars in the U.S. military. Winfield Scott loved Robert E. Lee. He was one of. He considered, Robert E. Lee one of his proteges. All right, and saw in him greatness.
Well, he was right to see that. I mean, just because he lost doesn't mean he didn't do. We'll get to him. Let's continue here. Go ahead and set the stage a little bit more, MC. Sorry, I cut you off.
So basically, Robert E. Lee surrounds it because the populace is already surrounded and preventing the escape of John Brown. And so Robert E. Lee then issues terms. You're right. He does send Jeb Stuart to issue terms. John Brown refuses. He then orders a storming of the arsenal, right, by the Marines.
John Brown's own son is killed, correct?
In the fight, a number of people die. John Brown's son is one of them. John Brown himself is
he told his son to die like a man. The piece of shit told his son to die like a fucking man when he's bleeding out for his father's cause. Don't sugarcoat this.
Hold on.
This man was a piece of shit.
He was heavily wounded himself, all right, through the throat in the seizing of the arsenal. And in fact, he's still so wounded that he can't even speak at the point where he's going in front of the hangman, which is why he had his written speech handed so that somebody could read it for him.
So that is Southern propaganda that says he told his son to die like a man and didn't give a fuck?
Yes.
Because I've heard that in numerous history texts.
That to say that he didn't care about his son is just ridiculous. All right. Now,
why would you put your son in that situation, sir?
He's dying for the cause. You got to remember that the cause of freeing the slave. Well, that's your.
You want to argue? No,
I'm not arguing for him. I'm saying from his perspective to say that
you're going to argue later, though, MC. Later in this series, you are going to tell me that all the people I'm going to be defending, Robert E. Lee, fucking Johnston. I won't defend Bragg, but even Bragg, Jefferson Davis. All these people were traitors and deserve to be hung. Don't tell me that a man who seizes a United States arsenal and tries a uprising within a segment of Virginia is not committing treason.
I didn't say that, and I wasn't saying that there. All I said is that the idea that he didn't care about his son.
But he's committing treason and he's bringing his son to it. You tell me, the terrorist, the drone.
He believes in a cause. There's a difference between whether or not you believe in a cause to the point where you're committing treason and your sons are committing treason with you, okay, to I don't care about my son.
Fair enough. But we have had the argument before about the drone strikes, and you're like, well, why's the kid with the terrorist father? Maybe he should care about his kid more. Well, maybe John Brown should have cared.
I never said that. I said he is the enemy as much as his father is.
Oh, okay. So, kill John Brown's son is what you're saying. Like that was a good.
John Brown's son died here.
I'm sorry.
Just like everybody else.
That was a stupid pivot. I apologize. That was fun. Yeah, scratch that one.
It's not. My discussion point here is not that that his son didn't deserve to go on trial with him if he'd have survived and be hung right with him. I do believe that. That's not my issue. My issue is saying that he didn't give a shit about his son that's not an accurate assessment of what was going on.
I'm saying if I was going to be a piece of shit and rob a bank, I'm not taking my kid with me. I'm not that big of a.
There's a difference between robbing a bank and doing what he was doing as well. I don't.
What is high treason? I mean, it's vastly worse. I mean, bank robbery. 4 years, you're good. High treason,
just remember that you say that it's vastly worse because I'll be throwing that one back in your face as well.
Oh, well, because it's not treason. The session is not treason. He didn't create a vote in Harper's Ferry to leave. Okay,
well,
that didn't happen.
I'm sorry, but that's you're trying to dodge things now. Treason is treason regardless of where.
Well, Mad Dodge. I mean, come on.
So anyway,
all right.
But no, he is then placed on trial. All right. Now, what's interesting about this is he's not tried by the United States.
Real quick,
and he could have.
Though I think you should read, or I can. I will have a little vitriol in it, so you might want to read the plea for Brown, and then on November 2nd, which is my birthday, by the way, is when they killed his ass. I think that was his final court address. But you might want to read the Brown.
You want me to read Thoreau's little statement? Okay. I foresee a time when at least the present form of slavery shall be no more here. We shall be at liberty to weep for Captain Brown. Then, and not till then, will we take our revenge. All right, that's David. That's Henry David Thoreau. Now, I want to say, hold on, I want to say something because that's not part of this timeline. All right, at least I don't think it is. Let me go a little bit further. I want to make sure that isn't part of this timeline. Go down a little bit if you don't mind. Okay, I don't see it anywhere in here. Okay, good. I think one of the more interesting commentaries at the hanging of John Brown, right, comes from the former slave. I cannot. What's his name? The big abolitionist slave at the time. I cannot think of his name.
Oh man, I think I know who you're talking about. Now
I don't know. I cannot believe I freaking just vapor locked on his name.
It's time for you to try our famous hot dog.
Yeah, I don't know, but while you're thinking about it, I'll go ahead and read the November 2nd. November 2nd, 1859. John Brown's final court address. I believe that to have interfered as I have done in behalf of his despised poor was not wrong, but right. Well, the means don't justify the ends, sir.
Frederick Douglass. Why I couldn't think of Frederick Douglass, I don't know. But Frederick Douglass makes a very interesting speech about this. And he said about John Brown. And the reason I want to point this out is the sentiment of what the dichotomy of the sentiment between people, because MADD presents the one sentiment where the Southerners looked at him as just an absolute terrorist and a madman, treasonous SOB that needed to be hanged, and he was. But Frederick Douglass made the statement going, "I'm almost ashamed. I'm willing to live for the slave to free him. But John Brown was willing to die for the slave." And that's a bit of a paraphrase, all right? It wasn't an exact quote, but it's close to that, right? But it shows you the difference in the sentiment between, and it shows you that just how polarized the country is becoming. All right, and it's becoming polarized along the issues of slavery. This is not something that's made up by the northern aggressionists, as MADD would like to say. This shows you just how polarizing this issue has become throughout the nation.
Yeah, well, I really do believe that John Brown was a terrorist, and I believe the definition of terrorism is murder. Pretty much, it's terrorizing a population for a political goal, and that is the definition of terrorism, and that is exactly what he was doing. It was a political goal. Once again, I come back to, you can end this problem without bloodshed. No, I firmly believe that.
You can't, because you got to remember, for every John Brown, okay, there's a Butcher Bill that you're not talking about.
Well, we'll get to them.
That's going on. Hold on, that are going on at this time frame. All right, that are taking place.
Okay. Do you want to do part 3 this weekend then, and we'll talk about the actual other side of it? No, that's fine. I'm going off of this timeline.
No, we can go. I just want people to understand. All right, let me ask a question. Why is John Brown's name so populous?
Because they hung him in Virginia for trying to free the slaves right before the Civil War actually happened. Well, look at the time frame here. We're talking about December 1859. He's executed.
Okay, but you're missing the reason I made the question. Okay, and that is the reason you see John Brown's name is because it was everywhere. Okay, it was in every paper. All right, in the North and every paper in the South. All right. That's why everybody knows his name, because this was being broadcast and being followed across the entire nation like a celebrity event.
Well, real quick, can you do a little diatribe about it for about 90 seconds? Why Ron to drink
So
some of this
what I'm
beer?
trying to point out, yeah. So what I'm trying to point out here is in every single newspaper across the nation right now, what has happened, and there's certain technologies that have come to the fore at this point. All right, the people, you know, they when they forget just what the impact of some of this has. All right, there's two big things that have happened from a technological standpoint that's becoming very prevalent at this time frame. One, of course, is railroads. All right, railway systems are now being built across the nation. All right, they're being built in the population centers. The population now is becoming far more mobile than it ever had in the past. All right, and now the railroads were still relatively new and were just starting to get their feet under them, but it has started to change the dynamics within the country, right? Both in the North and the South. And in fact, in the South, it will eventually have even a more drastic effect, all right, because of how now people are able to move around far quicker than they ever had been in the past, right? But the other big invention that's taken place, right, is the advent of the telegraph. Papers are no longer just local anymore. They're getting more international news or more nationalized news. And this information can take place and go across things on a much broader scale than it ever had been in the past. And John Brown's name is one of the first names that goes across from a celebrity standpoint. He is a celebrity, all right, being tried for these crimes. All right. Why is he a celebrity? Because there's a lot of people who justify his actions. They're not the murdering and savagery, not the hatcheting.
I know we brought it up. Yeah, we brought it up in the first part of this, but you do remember him chopping people up with a broadsword in Kansas, right?
Right. No, I'm putting that out there, right? I'm putting it in, but he is considered a celebrity. One of the first celebrities of the time. His name is known all over the place. This is why his name is so broadly talked about in the history books today. It's not that these other actions weren't taking place, all right? It's that now because of the actual ubiquitousness of the ubiquity of the telegraph, everybody knows his name. Everybody is following this trial. Everybody knows when he's killed, all right? And in the South, they all celebrate. In the North, they all sit up there and martyr the man.
But yeah, okay. Right before John Brown is executed, you have the Senator Albert Brown from Mississippi. I know of no mission which this government has to perform except to protect the citizen in his life, his liberty, and his property. When it fails in these great essentials, it has failed in everything. And whenever the government fails, it ought to be abolished. What say you to that type of sentiment from the senator of Mississippi?
Okay. But the government had.
He's talking about secession.
No, he's not talking about secession, and this is where this is the problem. When he starts talking about the government, all right, and especially when he's talking about it in this case, how are the people, all right, of Mississippi, all right, failing to be protected in their life, liberty, and property? Did the government not sit up there and capture John Brown? Did the government not sit up there and storm the building and put an end to his actions? No, the government did do all that. So what's he complaining about?
No, actually, no, I tend to agree with you actually on that point. No, that is valid and that is correct, and that's what I would have argued with him, even if I was the senator of Louisiana at the time. You know, like I would have said, "Hey, wait a minute, they did protect our rights. John Brown will see the noose on December 2nd. Come on now."
But the problem still exists, which is because of the Supreme Court ruling. All right, you are getting activity that's creating a dynamic that's causing problems. Not the least of which is, and this is not widely known, but there is sporadic fighting along the border. All right, due to the Fugitive Slave Act, where when they attempt to kidnap, all right, citizens that are living in the north. There are people rising up and citizens rising up that are firing on a lot of these kidnapping gangs that are going up north to grab people and come back down. This happened in several of the northern states, in Ohio and in Illinois specifically.
I actually haven't heard much about that, but now that I'm going for my bachelor's in history, I'm sure I'm going to hear a lot more about stuff like that I haven't necessarily read yet.
You can always find little pieces of things here and there that are going on. All right. But the reason that I wanted to talk about from a John Brown perspective is because now these things are becoming more widely spread due to the invention of the telegraph. All right. This is now mass communication, instantaneous mass communication, at least from a land-based perspective, across the world. And this hadn't been happening before.
All right. So we have December 5th, 1859. Virginia Governor Henry Weiss following John Brown's execution. The strongest argument against the unnatural war upon Negro slavery in one section by another of the same common country is that it inevitably drives to disunion of the states, embittered with all the vengeful hate of civil war. He is following with your line of thinking there, and that is strong case argument on your behalf, sir.
Yeah, I mean, he's recognizing the fact that what's going to happen now is there's going to be a civil war because of this, and that's going to be the result. All right, this is leading to a civil war, or because of what you've done is because of the ruling. All right, it was once again it was a ruling by a Supreme Court, not a legislative decision. All right, and the reason why it's having this effect is that very factor. This was not a decision made by the people of the United States. This was a decision made by 7 justices. All right, deciding they were going to read into the law what they wanted to read into the law and legislate from the bench, and this is the result. This is how you see the result starting to be inflamed out, to start to take place.
As you see it.
Well, no, absolutely. And I almost want to start reading these quotes, but they're with 1860. So do you have anything else about the whole 1850s now that we've concluded the timeline that you want to bring up? No,
not from the 1850s. I mean, we've pretty much covered everything that it just shows you where the bifurcation is taking place along lines nationally. And I think the thing to remember is going back to the election of the president Buchanan. Remember, you've basically got almost a third making these decisions, where you've got a third of the people are voting for the Republicans, a little over a third of the people were voting for Buchanan, and then you have another section that's close to a third that was neither side. All right, and this breaking that you're seeing is very similar to what was taking place prior to the Revolution. Prior to the Revolutionary War, in case you were wondering, I'm not talking about secession being
I know what you're talking about. Matt was in there. Okay, it's pretty funny. He's like, it's like watching part 2 of a movie when you never saw the first one. I haven't studied any of this since high school. Only been almost 20 years. But yeah, Matt, I do have a playlist that 40 ounce asked me to make because, well, his laptop's still dead and he only uses his cell phone, but he's still watching shit. So I do have a playlist for all of our Civil War series. I'm not sure what we're going to cover this weekend because there's a couple different ideas. When we go off air here in a couple minutes, I think I'm going to run them past MC. My final thoughts is that I tend to agree with one, the Dred Scott decision is the worst decision ever. And the only one that even comes close, in my opinion, is Roe v. Wade. And Two, this created a polarization of the entire country where people started to take sides. And when that starts happening, one thing Abraham Lincoln got right: a house divided cannot stand. He was right. I believe it should have split. We'll get into that. We're getting closer to the actual war, folks, and it should be fun because that's where MC and I are really going to argue. We've been tending to agree on the lead up to war, but we'll see next week. MC,
next week will probably be a bit more of a firework. Come this weekend.
So yeah, if that's all you got, then we're out of here. Thank you everybody for watching. Please like, subscribe. I do have a Patreon and a Streamlabs. The links are all on my homepage, youtube.com/Mad Dodge Productions. But you should already know that you're here. Anyway, good night, good luck. We'll see you this weekend for more Civil War. We'll see you tomorrow for the Red Eye Stream.